Hey guys and ladies, Skylar here with SurfPrep Sanding. What I want to do in this video clip here is go over the exchange out of spindle bearings on a 3x4 air sander. Tomorrow we're going to do one on the electric sander. The reason why I want to talk about the spindle bearings is in the last few days we've had a few people call in and say they've had their 3x4 SurfPrep air sander for about 3 to 4 years, and when they depress the throttle lever, there's air that blows through and they have no action in the tool. There's one of two things that are going on there when that happens. It's either the vanes inside the motor that's in the rotor are stuck in the slots of the rotor, or your spindle bearing is out. Let's go to the vanes in the rotor real quick. This is the rotor and this is our hardened steel cylinder. So this hardened steel cylinder has the rotor and the vanes that go into these slots in the rotor. And what happens is when you depress the lever, if you're using a lubricant or a tool oil that has a sticky base to it, what often happens is the vane will stay stuck in the slot in the rotor and it will not come out of the rotor to catch the wind that's being driven into the cylinder. So I'm sharing this with you to show you that this is the basic construction of the motor, and then of course there's a front end end plate and a top end end plate that keeps the two together, that keeps compression inside the unit or inside the motor when you're operating it. So if you have bad air, if your air supply is bad, you have water in your air, you'll have a lot of gunk, you'll have different contaminants that flow through your air lines and go into your tool, and it'll keep the vanes from coming out of the rotor. But what we're going to talk about today is changing out the spindle bearings, because when the spindle bearings lose all their grease after 3 or 4 years, that's metal on metal, and that metal on metal creates a tremendous amount of heat and the bearings break down. So we're going to go through that process. What I'd like to do is, if you can pan over here real quick, how I do this is I'll use a 2.5 millimeter screwdriver handle. I'll use a 2.5 millimeter L wrench hex that I use as well, and then I also use a 4 millimeter in the hex style Allen wrench. And I'll go through, as we go through the tool, you'll see where I use those. Another thing that you'll want to have on hand is a very small tipped bladed screwdriver. I don't know if you can see that real well. If I hold up maybe this cloth here, you can see how tiny. Does that help at all? Mm-hmm. You can see how tiny that blade is. You're going to need one of these. It's going to help to have a ratcheting 9/16 inch open end ratchet with a closed end. You're going to need a bearing separator to do this. You're going to need a slide hammer. You're going to need an adapter piece that screws onto the slide hammer, that this male thread here will ultimately be screwed into the spindle nut. This is a brand new spindle nut, and I'm just going to show you how this screws on here, but you'll see where and how I use this in a bit. And you'll need this slide hammer assembly, and then you're going to need a dish set, which this here is your dish that you're going to put the actual spindle nut into. When we reassemble the bearings, this is going to slide right in there and sit right there so that we can press fit the bearings back on to the spindle nut. So I just wanted to share with you some of the different tools that you need. The spindle bearing replacement repair kit is SPA 0497. What that has there is it has your two bearings. It has a shim, a locator shim. It's got the base washer that sits on the bottom, and then there's also a dust shield in here. Okay, so let's jump right into this. I'm going to use my screwdriver handled 2.5 millimeter hex, and I'm going to drop this down into the pad screws. I'm going to break those loose. I like to have a white terry cloth kind of a layout so that everything is positioned in an orderly fashion. These screws are small. They're easy to lose if you drop them on the ground. So it's nice to have all of this stuff in one spot. And you'll notice as I go through this how I lay everything out and how I want my assembly it makes my assembly a lot easier. So I've just removed the 4th screw and that drops my backup pad off the bottom of the tool and the plate. You'll notice here that this backup pad is hammered. This pad could have been changed out, should have been changed out way longer before you had these melting marks, these burn areas here. This is a lot of edge sanding on a 90-degree corner. You know, it's just beat up and torn up. It should have been replaced, so that's something that you ultimately want to replace. This here is real tricky, okay? This is where you're going to need the L hex Allen wrenches. The screws, the 2.5 millimeters here, are torqued into the pad supports, which we'll get to in a second. And then of course this center screw, we're going to use the 4 millimeter. And it's torqued in there. I want to make sure that this is in there really nice. Oh, I've already taken this apart. That's okay. But when you break this free, you want to put it in a position to where you get some leverage on it. Get the tool up in a position where you can crank on this and break that free. This one was already broken free. That's okay. And it does take a considerable amount of force to get these things broken out of there. Let's see if these pad support screws, let's see if these were broken free. So we're going to get our 2.2. These were already loose too. This isn't fun for you because you're not getting to see the real deal, but that's okay. You do need to put a considerable amount of leverage again on these screws. I like to sit the tool like on the edge of a workbench. I'll put it in here, hold this with my left hand or right hand, depending on if you're left-handed or right-handed, and I use the length of this Allen I seat that deeply into that screw head and I break that free. All right, if you don't seat this L-shaped Allen hex wrench into that screw, you will strip it. If you try to use this Allen wrench that came with the tool in the box, this is only to be used to remove the backup pad that we took off earlier. That's all that's to be used for. It is not designed to be used to break these free. So let's go ahead and remove the 3rd one. Let's remove the 4th one, and let's see what we have here. So we've removed those 4 plate screws and the center screw. We're going to take the plate off. There's 2 shims on here on this locator pin that's on our spindle nut. Here's the 2 shims. Here is the counterbalance to the motor. Here is the spindle nut that I showed you earlier. This piece here is in there, and this is the locator pin. Now, you'll know if your bearings are frozen up or if they're about to freeze up if this spins freely. You should feel resistance in this spin, then you know that there's grease in there. If you feel this not moving at all and it's locked up by moving this locator pin here, it's frozen. Then, with that being the case, you take this small blade screwdriver that we talked about earlier. There is a snap ring right down in here, and you're going to grab the edge of the snap ring. You're going to pull it up just like that, and you're going to rotate this around like that, and you're going to pop that snap ring out of place. I'm going to push the tail end of the snap ring over here to get her all the way out. So that locator or that snap ring is now, I just grabbed a different screwdriver because it's got a little bigger blade on it, is free. You want to be careful not to bend this and just pull it straight out, pop it out just like that. All right, so now your snap ring's out. Next, we're going to take our slide hammer with this adapter piece on it that reduces down the thread. We're going to give this one slide, 1 or 2 at the most. You should see the entire spindle bearing assembly pop right out. So there's one snap, pulled it right out. This cavity in here inside the counterbalance is fairly clean. It's really clean. I usually, before I'll redo or do a reassembly, I'll hit this cavity with some brake cleaner. And I'll use some cotton swabs and clean out any residual grease that may be in there. So that's the removal of the spindle bearings. The pad supports are these two pieces here that look like ladders, if you can see that. I'm going to show you another tool that one of our guys repaired last week, and I want to show you what a broken pad support looks like. And I want to talk a little bit about why pad supports break. This looks like a ladder. If you notice here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rungs to the ladder. The ladder, all the rungs should be in place. If you can see here, this one is broken. How this happens is by exerting a lot of downward force into the substrate that you're sanding. This particular tool, not only was the pad support in the front and the rear broken, as you see there, the whole metal plate on the inside was cracked and snapped because there's so much force exerted down into the substrate, and that's not how we sand. So these pad supports in this case, they look totally fine. There's no issues that I see with any of the rungs being broke. Oh, there's a rung that's broken right there. So we would need to, actually, I'll just show you right now, we need to go to the top with our 2.5 millimeter hex head screwdriver, and we need to remove these two screws, and that's going to drop that pad support right out. Before I get this out of here, I want to make sure that you take note that you see the cutout in the profile of the pad support here. You see kind of a little cutout. That cutout is on one side, it's flat on the other. The cutout always has to face the swing of the counterbalance. So when I take this out, you will see that this pad support is broken. There's one of the rungs. When one breaks, they're all gonna pretty much follow that, follow in line in there. We then, the reassembly, we're going to take this whole unit, we're going to drop it back down into here. But before we do that, we're going to put this lock ring back between the spindle nut itself and the washer. We're going to drop this right down in here, just like that. We're then going to take a small bladed knife. We're going to drop the ring in there, and we're going to work it around, and I'm going to grab this here and snap it right down in there. You want to make sure that you follow this all the way around so that this ring is completely in place. And at that point, you are done. So what we want to do is I want to finish off showing you how you would put the plate and everything back together on here. And it would be the reverse of what you did. Put the two shims on this locator pin like this. Drop your plate with this hooked side facing towards the top of the tool down. Put the pin in there. Get your 4 millimeter bolt. Screw it in there and make sure that those two shims are in place. At that point, get your longer 2.5 millimeter screws and drop them into the pad supports. Screw them in there, and I'm going to show you the force that you'll want to use on locking these down in here. Deeply seat the short end of this in here, grab this long end, hold the tool in place, turn it, turn it, turn it until you feel some flex in this L. When you feel that flex, you're tight enough. Get your 4 millimeter, put it in there. Really crank on that baby a little bit till you feel a little bit of flex. You're done. If you notice, I never did put the other pad support in the front, and the reason why is I wanted you to understand the change out of the spindle bearing, but you can follow the same process and get through that whole installation just by doing what I showed you there. If for some reason your holes are not aligned When you're trying to get this plate in place, just use a screwdriver, drop it in the bottom of that pad support so that you have access to the hole. Put your screw in there, and then just screw it back down in there and crank that nice and tight so that you've got good flex on the tool. And always make sure that your 2.5 millimeter hex head Allen wrenches are seated deeply into the holes. If you don't, you will absolutely strip the heads. Our quality control check when we're manufacturing and assembling our tools, there's never a tool that goes out with deformed or it just never happens that we have screw heads that are stripped out. It never happens. So we're anal about that. We're very passionate about the assembly of our tools and how we put them together from the OEM point all the way from to tool repair. So that there takes care of a complete spindle bearing change. Thank you for watching.